So in today's Past to the Past, we're going to investigate a tragedy that happened during the construction of the Sheffield to Manchester Railway, which is just a couple of hundred yards ahead of us on this path. So now on the route of the old Sheffield to Manchester line, the Woodhead line, about which we made a few videos, and they're getting quite a bit of local interest, so thank you for that. And one of our friends, Simon, thanks for this, pointed out that on the Romticle Viaduct, which is about 3/4 of a mile in front of us, there's a really interesting stone about a tragic incident that occurred there in 1844.
Yes, so we were told that a heavy stone had fallen and killed one of the navvies working on the viaduct.
Yeah, and that's sort of partially true, but digging into the original sources, I found that the actual full details of the story are far more nuanced and far more complex than that. So we're going down to the viaduct to investigate what really happened on the tragic day of the 6th of July, 1844.
So it sounds like another sad tale on this railway line.
Yeah, I think it's important when we walk these places, as well as looking at the infrastructure and all the interesting bits and pieces you can see, to think about the people who lived on these railways, who built these railways, who worked on these railways. And that's what we're very much fans of on this channel. And if you haven't subscribed already, please do so. We'll bring out regular videos, about 1 or 2 a week, for you to enjoy and find interesting things about the past in this country.
So I understand that the building of the railway was contracted out to different developers. It wasn't down to just one company.
That's right, and the bit we're going to investigate was under the contract of a company called J&R Crawshaw, and they had two of the trickier bits of building the Woodhead line, which was the Romticle Viaduct we're going to investigate now, and also the Thurgoland Tunnel, which sits just a couple of yards away from the viaduct.
So the most convenient car park to get to the viaduct is probably the one which is a public car park at Oxspring Playing Fields.
Yeah, it's probably about a mile's walk from there.
Which is nice. It's a nice walk down and back up, so you get a few miles, or you get a couple of miles.
So we can just see the fence ahead of us. That stops people falling off the edge of the Romticle Viaduct. It's probably about 100 yards ahead. So we're going to have a closer look at this lovely piece of railway engineering. As you walk down, if you've got a keen eye, you'll see little bits of remains of when this railway was electrified after the Second World War.
Standing at the top of the viaduct, you really get a feeling for the deepness of the valley that they would have had to traverse.
So according to a local walk guide, underneath where I'm sitting there's a stone in the viaduct wall, and it's in memory of somebody called William Crawshaw. And the guide says William Crawshaw was a navvy employed on the construction of the Sheffield, Ashton-under-Lyne and Manchester Railway. Tragically, whilst building the viaduct in 1844, a stone fell on him and claimed the poor man's life. His workmates later built the stone block into the structure. The stone block is still visible today if you search hard enough for it. So this sounds like the story of a poor navvy. You get the idea of a poor labourer, maybe moving from part of the country to part of the country as the canals and railways are built, working at top speed with pressure on to complete the job, poorly paid, spending all his money on drink on a Friday when he was paid, and then living hand to mouth for the next week. But the truth of the matter is a lot more complicated. You may have noticed the man's name was William Crawshaw, and you may have remembered that we said this section of the line was built by a company called J&R Crawshaw. There's a link there. So the best way to get down to see this viaduct from below is to go another couple of 100 yards up the trail and come off on a path just before you get to the Thurgoland Tunnel.
The path to the viaduct is over this stile here and then down a dirt trail. But firstly, we're going to come off just up this ramp here and have a look at this building over my left shoulder, have a little think about it, and then we'll come back and go down this dirt path to the viaduct.
So this small collection of buildings locally is known as Romticle. It gave its name to the viaduct, and it was known as that in the 1840s too. So obviously it's a private residence, so we're not going in. But back in the 1840s, it was known as the Romticle Inn, and it's going to play an important part in our story. So quite a steep path down to the field where we can get a great view of the viaduct. Okay, at this time of year it's been quite dry.
So as you're walking down this path, you can start to see the steepness of the embankment. So at the end of the path, we come to another stile, right next to the River Don. Over there you can see the viaduct in sight. How magnificent it looks on such a beautiful day.
So a very tranquil spot these days as the River Don flows peacefully to my right. But on the 6th of July 1844, a horrific accident occurred which took the life of William Caw. And we're going to take a closer look at the events that led to that tragic circumstance.
On my GPS tracker, we've covered 1.4 miles from the car park at Oxspring to the bottom of this magnificent viaduct.
So some facts. This viaduct is 75 feet in height and it's made from ashlar stone. Now if you look at the stones, they've all been individually shaped by skilled craftsmen, and that's where William Caw comes in, because he was actually a stonemason and he was the brother of the men Joseph and Richard Caw, who had been contracted to build this part of railway line, including the viaduct and the tunnels.
So a very skilled person then, John.
Yeah, a very skilled person, not the image of the poor navvy moving around the country on low wages. He actually lived a few miles up the line at Dewsbury and he had a wife and family. There's actually 5 archers behind me. So what was happening on the 6th of July 1844, work was on course to build this viaduct. Now the way these stones were lifted up from the ground was by something called a Lewis bolt system, whereby a hole was driven into the stone and a bolt was put in. It had actually been used since Roman times, very ingenious, and then the stones were lifted up. Unfortunately, a stone being lifted up fell from the connections on the Lewis bolt, fell straight on to poor William Caw, who was killed outright. Now, if you don't like the blood and gore of history, then please skip forward about 20 seconds now. So yeah, the stone fell on his head, killed him instantly. Also fell on his belly, and the newspaper reports say that his intestines were forced out through his backside, just yards from where we're standing now. A gruesome sight. So Crawshaw's workmates carried his body from where he'd been killed, a few yards behind us, up this slope, up to where the Romticle Inn is, just maybe 100 yards up the slope there. You can imagine them horrified, carrying the mangled remains of their work colleague. But the 6th of July 1844 had been a really strange day, because William's brother Joseph had been up to York to negotiate a contract for the building of the York to Scarborough Railway. Now there'd been a rumour put around that Joseph, while standing on the track at York Station, had been knocked over and killed. Maybe it was a malicious rumour put around by business rivals. You know, when you're a successful contractor building railways, you're going to make enemies. But the news had gone down the line that Joseph had been killed, and the other brother, Richard, had gone up to York to verify that that was not the case, and actually found out that Joseph had been successful in securing the contract for building parts of the York to Scarborough Railway. That news had reached William back down here, who it was reported was in a really high spirits, knowing that there would be further work for him as a stonemason when this section of railway had finished, working further up in Yorkshire on the York to Scarborough Railway.
Well, that sounds like one weird day.
Yeah, so there's a lot more to this story than just a poor navvy working under here, killed by a stone, oh dear. There's lots of complexities to this story. So yeah, a little bit more about the Caw. So William Caw, the man who died here, was 34 years old. 4 of his children had already predeceased him in infancy. That says a lot about the living conditions and the health and sanitation at the time, that even a relatively respectable stonemason could lose so many children in infancy. There were 3 children actually survived him and his wife, so he's by no means a poor man. In fact, his body, when it was taken to Dewsbury, was buried under, appropriately enough, a large stone slab in Dewsbury Minster. And his older brother Joseph about whom there'd been those terrible rumours that he'd been killed by a train at York, he actually, in later years, a couple of years after this viaduct was finished, was living in a very large and prosperous residence in the centre of York. So, a man has been killed, and that death needed a coroner's inquest, which took place at the Romticle Inn, just 100 yards on our right. And it makes for a very interesting read, because William Crawshaw's workmates told some uncomfortable home truths about some of the working practices used when building that viaduct. So another mason, Joshua Thompson, who had been in the vicinity at the time, said he had frequently warned William Crawshaw that the Lewis bolts were not strong enough. In fact, Thompson was quoted as saying that the accident was chiefly attributable to Crawshaw's own neglect and not taking sufficient precaution. Another man, Thomas Walker, who was foreman of the works, corroborated what Thompson had said. He said he had repeatedly cautioned William Crawshaw and told him about the danger. Walker had said that the holes were not deep enough and the stones had not been sufficiently Lewised. In fact, the previous week a stone had fallen from a place 25 feet high within a foot of Walker's own head. Another mason, Thomas Hepworth, who was at the top of the pier, said he did not see the stone fall, but he is of the opinion that it hadn't been properly Lewised. He'd often spoken to Crawshaw of the impropriety of Lewising the stone so carelessly, and considers Crawshaw, the deceased, entirely to blame.
So his workmates were blaming him then for his own death?
Yeah, in so many words.
How very sad.
Yeah, and what was sad was that William's brother, the contractor Joseph, was present at the inquest, and the coroner had some quite stinging words about the importance of what we would call today health and safety in the workplace. It was a pity to see a man taken away in the prime and vigour of his age, and who it appeared only a few minutes before had been rejoicing in the prospects that awaited him. Little did he think that his mortal career would be soon terminated, hastened by his own reckless behaviour. He was pleased that Mr. Joseph Crawshaw, the brother of the deceased, was present at the inquest, because he would be persuaded that in works of such magnitude there must be liabilities to danger, and hence the necessity of using the greatest caution. So probably about 50 feet above us is a stone, and that stone was placed there in 1844 by William Crawshaw's workmates. It says W. Crawshaw killed by this stone, 6th of July 1844. Now the story is it was long forgotten, placed there by his workmates who then moved on to other jobs, and it was only discovered in the early 1980s by somebody doing some inspection work under the bridge. So I hope this video has now brought back to memory the full story of William Crawshaw. So sometimes when you read 2 or 3 lines of history, it's easy to put your own interpretations on the past. But I hope what we're shown today is sometimes it's important to delve a little deeper into the story, look at the characters involved and the circumstances involved, and then it becomes a much richer and ultimately actually a more tragic tale. So as we leave this place of awe, this place of wonder, but this place of tragedy, we hope that you, like us, have reflected on some of the people who worked on building this magnificent railway. And if you have, please consider subscribing to the channel.
So yes, we hope you can join us next time, where every journey begins with a path to the past.